Thank you to everyone who's joined us for our July Impact Forum call. We are so excited to welcome Shelley McDermott-Wadsworth and Kathy Brownie-Arzik of MFRI, who will discuss their Measuring Communities tool, which charts the state-specific needs of military and veteran caregivers across the nation. And they will also share details on how they have ongoing efforts to generate the data that feeds into this tool. We are so excited. We decided to have this Impact Forum call because we hear all the time, and we experience it ourselves, where are caregivers? What do they need? What are their needs on a local basis? And so we teamed up with MFRI a couple years ago to start to have a better understanding of caregiver needs on the local level. And all of this is information that we, as the tool continues to be developed out, we will be sharing with our city partners and our nonprofit partners and our fellows as well. So a little bit of background on our guest speakers today. Dr. McDermott-Wadsworth is a professor in Purdue University's Department of Human Development and Family Studies and is the director of MFRI and the Center for Families. Her research focuses on relationships between job conditions and family life, especially with regard to military families and organizational policies, programs, and practices. She has been published in scientific journals such as the Journal of Marriage and Family and the Academy of Management Journal. Dr. McDermott-Wadsworth's work has been funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Henry A. Murray Center, and the Department of Defense, as well as the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, the State of Indiana, and the Lilly Endowment, Incorporated. And then Kathy oversees the Family Support Team and operations at MFRI. The Family Support Team provides outreach and resources to children and families of service members and veterans. In addition, it works with community organizations and professionals who offer care for service members and their families. We are so excited to have you ladies with us today and to have you talk through how you've started to understand the needs of caregivers at the local level. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and we'll get started.
Great, thank you, Molly, and welcome to everyone joining this call. We're very excited to be able to share with you our work with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, trying to help understand the military caregivers across our country. And so when Molly goes to the next slide, who we are in terms of the organizations at Purdue that have worked to develop the Measuring Communities tool. So Shelley and I represent the Military Family Research Institute, and it says here in terms of how we conduct our research that really affects and looks at the military and veteran families, and then also work to help shape the policies and programs as well as the practices that focus on their well-being. And so the Military Caregiver Project that we're working on with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is one of those. Then we also have our Purdue Center for Regional Development, who really works on a lot of the economic data that we have on our site. And they also are looking at regional collaborations, prosperity, and all of the other economic data that you see. They are really the organization behind our interactive mapping tool. So those are the two organizations at Purdue who've been working on the Measuring Communities tool for the last about 5 years. So as we move forward, some of you may or may not be familiar with Measuring Communities. So here's just a brief description of what it is. It's a tool for you, and really what it focuses on: military and veteran relevant characteristics in geographic areas across the country. You can choose state level, you can choose county level, you can do a combination of your geographies based on your needs in terms of your organization. And we learn how communities are changing over time. So we have historical data on there, so we can take a look at poverty rates, for example, in communities and how they've changed over the years, employment data, those types of things. You can also compare your community to others that are similar to yours. So we have things like the rural-urban continuum, so you can see how rural areas might compare to some of the more urban areas. You can actually look at counties who are near where you are. So those are the things that you can do to actually look at communities that are similar to yours. And as we are working with organizations to map their data, you can see how the progress is being made on certain characteristics based on what you're looking at. So that's actually what Measuring Communities is. It's really a tool for your use. So when we actually go to the Measuring Communities website, and right here you can see the URL. So when you go to measuringcommunities.org, you're going to see there on the left-hand side 3 options for you. You can explore the data, you can view our report, or our enhanced report. So you can go there when you want to actually look at the data. You can become a member to access that. So that screen is actually on your right-hand side. You can apply for an individual or organizational membership. The individual the individual ID is specifically for you to use. If you're part of an organization and you would like everyone within your organization to have access, you can create one ID that you can actually share with your entire organization, whether it's 2 people, 20 people, or 200. They can all use the same ID. And so that's how you actually enter the site. And then if you actually want to go to the next slide. When you get to the landing page, you have the opportunity to search over 60 indicators in 10 different areas. And you can actually look at data in 3 different ways. You can look at it by a table, by an interactive map, or by a graph. So there's 3 different ways that you can actually look at the data. You can also access the snapshots that we have developed, and the military caregiver snapshot is one of those. We also have a master interactive map, which actually contains all of the information. So if you want to look at information across domains, you can do that on the master map. So it's a really versatile tool. Based on what your needs, what kind of information you're looking for, you can make determinations on how you view the information. Okay. On the next slide, I want to talk really quickly about the military caregiver snapshot. And we've done this in terms of supporting the Hidden Heroes grant that we received from the Elizabeth Dill Foundation. And what we're looking at is that, as Laurel had said, looking at caregiver needs more on a local level. So what we wanted to do was really kind of provide this geographic base of information about caregivers and their needs, because caregivers in the state of Washington might be very different in terms of their needs as caregivers in Idaho or Florida or Texas. So we wanted to get some information about how these needs might differ as the geographic base changes. So working with the Elizabeth Dill Foundation, they launched a survey on their website, and we had over 2,000 responses to the survey, which was actually much more than we anticipated. So the response that we got was tremendous. And then what we did is that we created a standardized report for each state. So on the Measuring Communities tool, we have a standardized state snapshot and a community snapshot. We also then created the caregiver snapshot at the state level. Based on the number of survey responses, we couldn't go lower at this time to individual counties, but we do have it at the state level. Okay. So if you go to the next slide. So in our first grant, we worked with Laurel and her team to really develop this concept of what kinds of things do we want to know? What kind of information did the Elizabeth Dill Foundation want to know other than your basic demographic information about the caregivers? So we looked at what kind of information we wanted, what kind of data was out there, and then what kind of information did we need to get from the caregivers themselves. So in our second grant, we really kind of developed the survey, and it was launched in October of 2018. And then based on that information, we worked with the Elizabeth Dill Foundation staff to actually identify the indicators which would make sense in terms of the caregiver snapshot. Some of the things that we decided not to include was based on the survey responses, and one of those happened to be the gender of the caregiver. More than 90% of the respondents were female, so including gender on the snapshot really didn't give us a lot more information than what we had already known. But things like the needs from caregivers who are caring for a post 9/11 veteran or a pre 9/11 veteran, those seem to actually tell some pretty good stories. And so working with the Elizabeth Dill Foundation staff, we made some determinations in terms of what indicators we would have on the snapshot. We prepared the snapshot as a sample, as a pilot. working with them, then we actually focused on the design and the display options, and then we actually launched the Snapshot on May 22nd at the Hidden Heroes event in Indianapolis. So the next slide. So we are housing the Caregiver Snapshot on the Measuring Communities online data portal. And on the slide here is a sample of the Texas Caregiver Snapshot. And again, it's this state level data based on the survey responses. It includes the demographic information as well as the well-being information. So looking at the top caregiver needs, pre-9/11 and post-9/11, you can see on the top line there is the age of the caregiver. And again, we made the determination that looking at the pre-9/11 and post-9/11 veterans that are being cared for, we can see that there might be some very young caregivers caring for much older veterans, or much older caregivers caring for very young veterans, because those may have implications as communities look at support systems for those caregivers. We also wanted to look at the type of injuries in terms of the complexity. Were caregivers caring for veterans who had just one injury, either a physical injury, service-connected disability, or a hidden injury, or are they actually caring for a veteran who has more than one type of those injuries, meaning more complex care is possibly needed? We also wanted to take a look at their employment status, because we heard that was something that was of a concern in terms of financial well-being. And then also too, are they caring for children inside the home in terms of under 18? And did they have to move to be closer to medical resources? So those are the kinds of things that are actually on the Caregiver Snapshot. Okay.
So this is Shelley. Am I unmuted? Just a second.
Yes, you are.
Oh, great. Thank you. So one of the things that we've been working on, which you won't see on the site yet, but is coming, is some information about confidence in data. And I know that we all get so much data coming at us every day, and it's so hard to decide how to think about the data that we see and what kinds of decisions we should feel comfortable making. And so we've been working on a little confidence index, we call it, and thanks to Terry Tennelian for being a sounding board about this, because she and I have been talking about this issue for quite a long time. And so you'll see that eventually on the Measuring Communities site. But with regard to the snapshot data, two of the things that I think are really helpful about the snapshot are that it really does deal with this with a topic that hasn't had as much data around it as we all would like. And caregivers are not always the easiest people to find. And so Dole, I think, has done a really good service to the community here by helping to add to an important database about caregivers, particularly for military members and veterans. And this is a large sample, which is great. And the folks that are receiving care who are being described in these data they have diverse caregiving needs. They come from diverse eras and that sort of thing. The caregivers themselves, as Kathy pointed out, are mostly females. So that's something to keep in mind as a limitation. There are other limitations, though, that should temper the degree to which people base decisions on these data. For example, these data were gathered from folks who have already connected with the Dole Foundation in some way, or saw the websites where invitations to participate in the survey were posted. So it's possible that there might be some important caregivers that we didn't get into the survey. And of course, since we don't have a list where we can invite people to participate that is representative of the national population of caregivers, we couldn't do random sampling or use probability methods. And when you can find data that use those sorts of methods, those are data that you can have a lot of confidence in, but there are very few such data in the caregiver space. So that's something to strive for, but difficult to achieve. We're also always very interested in high response rates. You can't really know about response rates unless you are able to use some sort of random or probability method for sampling, because you need a list. You have to know how many people saw the invitation in order to decide what % of people responded. So that's not possible in this situation. And something else to strive for in the future is to use well-validated instruments, ideally where we have well-established norms or cutoffs. In this particular snapshot, we're focused a lot on demographic information, so we haven't yet tried to use any measures where it would make sense to try to use something that's been validated in other studies or for which there are norms. But for example, if in the future we were to try to gather data about caregivers' psychological health or physical health or other issues, it would be very important at that point to use well-validated instruments with these established norms. So we're going to be sharing more information about this sort of thing on the site, because we want users to use the information appropriately given the nature of the information. So with the caregiver snapshot, it tells you what caregivers in that state who responded to the survey reported. Often those numbers are small relative to the number of caregivers in the state, and so it might make good sense to use the information that you gain to do things like ask people when they come for services whether they're a caregiver and see how their answers compare to these answers. It might prompt you in your region or state to gather systematic data more intensively from caregivers in your area, or it might lead you to dig into these issues a little bit more. In states where there are not large numbers of respondents for the state, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to completely change state policy related to what these caregivers said. But nonetheless, the information that they've given you provides some clues about things that you can follow up on to try to develop an even deeper understanding about the needs of caregivers and care recipients in your state or across the nation. In the future, I know, I'll just say a couple of things here, but then Kathy and others may have things that they would like to add. I know it's a priority for all of us to continue to add responses so that we can keep strengthening these data and bolster them. And we always are working on trying to help communities and organizations and users understand how they can use the data. And let me stop there and invite Kathy and our Dole colleagues to add whatever they would like to add.
Shelley, I think that you've actually covered a lot of that.
I didn't have a good note, but well, one thing, I can blow Kathy's horn a little bit, because later this summer, we're going to be releasing the second annual report from Measuring Communities, which will be kind of a rundown of how we're doing in the country on military and veteran issues. And we'll continue to add information to the data portal. We're always very interested in hearing from users and ways that we can keep trying to make this more useful to you. And if you have interests in being a data partner with us and mobilizing your data for good across the country, we're happy to work with you to do that, particularly as it relates to caregivers. And I think the next slide has contact information for Kathy if you have follow-up questions or comments. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to our Dole colleagues and invite questions.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it and appreciate the look at the tool so far. For those of you on the phone, we're opening it up for questions now. So if you have any, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will get those answered to you. But just to start us off, and I see a couple of you raising your hand. If you are able to type your question, that would be amazing. I guess just to start us off, going back a little bit, we talked about how we built out our measuring community tool and how it impacts the military caregiver population. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other data sets you pulled from to help inform the measuring communities tool overall?
Sure. Well, we wanted to first of all look at data that's available for every community in the country. So a majority of what we have is at the county level, some is at the state level. But in the very beginning, we actually sent surveys to stakeholders who are working in this field in terms of military and veteran families, asking them what is important for their work. And so also using the community blueprint to take a look at what domains are important if we look at and answer the question, what do communities need to have in place to become more military friendly? So using the 10 domains that are in the community blueprint and other organizations as well, such as the Beyond the Yellow Ribbon in Minnesota, joining community forces, those kinds of mobilization efforts we took a look at. Then we also tried to find the data sources that, first of all, are nationally available, so governmental sources such as the Census Bureau, Department of Labor, some of these bigger data sources. We also took a look at state level sources that could be specific to different domains. So when we take a look at the financial well-being, we wanted to see, okay, what are some potential state tax benefits that might be of benefit to service members, veterans, and their families. So we kind of have a combination of nationally reliable sources, state level sources, and then also working with organizations such as the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, the American Red Cross, other organizations that actually have data that they're collecting that might be of use to folks who are working in this space in their communities. So that's how we kind of made some determinations about what might be on the site. And then we also put those out to the subject matter experts to say, does this make sense? Would this help in your work? And then also too, we're getting feedback from the users about what's important to them. And we've actually added indicators based on some user suggestions. So it's a combination of quite a few things.
Great, thank you so much. We had a ton of questions pour in, and I'm going to get to all of them as we go through. But I think the first one to start off with is just sort of a process question. How do you get a member ID to log on to the measuringcommunities.org? And I guess if you're registering as an individual, are you still able to see the information on measuring communities? How does it work? How do people access it, I guess?
Okay, if you want to go back to slide 4. Okay, right there. So you go on, so if you look at the left side of the slide, measuringcommunities.org is the URL. Click on the top purple box, explore the web-based data, and then you'll see the right-hand side there, which is the login. But if you go down to the very bottom, it says to access Measuring Communities, become a member. So you click on that hyperlink and you put in your information. You can choose an individual or organizational membership. There are just a few differences, but as an individual member, you can see everything. Organizations can see and download all of the information. Individuals can too. Then once you have your ID, which is generated automatically, it's generated right there, you use that to log on. And then if you can go to the next slide. You then go to the landing page. And there's a 90-day cookie on that, so you don't have to enter your ID every time that you go to the site. So that's actually how you access the information and become a member.
Great, thank you so much. The next set of questions, and I'm for those on the phone, I'm going to combine a couple of the similar ones I'm seeing. The next set of questions centers around data partnering. And how the folks on the phone can be involved to reach out to caregivers in their communities. So can you expound first on what it means to become a data partner with MFRI and how they can support that? And then specifically, we had someone reach out to ask if they can be involved in updating data for the Texas area. So I guess what would it look like to be a data partner for MFRI specifically? And then also, how can they be involved in getting this out to more caregivers?
Okay, and Shelley, you can chime in if I'm forgetting something here. So with MFRI, we always are looking for organizations in this space that actually can benefit from having their information on the site, as well as those who use it. Is this information that would be beneficial to them? And then we begin conversations in terms of what kind of information do they gather and how do they gather it. So actually going back to the slide that Shelley had in terms of the confidence in the data, having those discussions in terms of what information is available, how you gather it, and then how potentially it could be displayed on the site. Not all information is the same in terms of being able to view it, that type of thing. So we begin to actually have those conversations with those organizations. And then if it seems like it's going to be mutually beneficial to the site, to the organization, then we actually enter into data sharing agreements and set out the parameters for how we share that information, how it's gathered, how it's stored, those types of things, because we do want to maintain the confidentiality of the data gathering partner. It is your information, and so we actually have those conversations, and depending upon the information, how do we support that effort? So what resources are available to support that work? Shelley, anything additional?
I guess I would just add, so there are things that we can do that can help individual partners kind of regardless of their size. We're somewhat limited in that way, but we're especially interested in partners who gather large amounts of data or data from large numbers of people, particularly about their outcomes. And so any of you that have been involved perhaps in a statewide survey or a regional survey, that might be something where there might be great value in that, not only to you and to us as managers of the site, but also to other users. But you, for example, I'm sure that our DOLE colleagues would be quite interested in collaborating with you, and we can certainly offer some suggestions to help. If you wanted to dig more deeply into caregiver issues in your area or your state and get more responses, then we'd be happy, of course, to map those data, and you would have them for your own use as well as others.
Thank you so much. I think that answers one of our other questions, which was, we'd love to be able to use a survey to track caregivers and their needs in our specific community. Is there a way to develop surveys for individual cities to collect city-specific data? So I think one thing that I would say, and what we'll do is we will send everyone the survey that feeds into the Measuring Communities tool, into the Military Caregiver Snapshot as part of our wrap-up for this call. That is one way to get engaged and to start getting more responses that will enhance this tool as a whole. And then I think that, the way the questions are structured and the type of information we elicit in that survey, it does allow for caregivers to comment on specific local needs that they have, or their perception of some of the challenges in their communities. So I think that feeding into that particular survey that we've built out already, you are going to get a lot of the state-specific and the community-specific answers as well. Another question, is there information on whether caregivers are caring for children and their children's ages? I do know that we collected that response about children in the home. think we included it on the snapshot. Kathy, am I wrong?
No, you're correct. We didn't, because we were limited in terms of the space on the snapshot. But what I'm doing right now is I'm just checking on the side. Yes, so actually, if you go on the site, and although it's not in the snapshot, if you're looking at the slide that Laurel has up, you can actually look at it through the table. So you go into, on the top, you have topics. You click down and it's under the demographic tab. And then there's a whole section on military caregivers, and you can identify those that are caring for children in the home. We don't have the ages because that potentially could be too identifiable, but what we did is that the number who have responded to that question on the survey in that state, how many of those respondents have children under 18 years of age, and of those, how many children are they caring for? So they're caring for one child, two children, three children. So we have it that way. We don't have it that this person has a 0 to 5 or a 6 to 12. We have it at the number of children they're caring for in the home.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And what we can do is, it's on this slide, but we can also perhaps work with the MFRI team to get some screenshots of specifically where you can get that demographic data that Kathy just mentioned, so that we can send that out after the call as well. And we do have the responses from the caregivers in the survey. If there's specific topics that interest people that come up, we can work with MFRI to start to collect some of that data too. This is an ongoing project for us, so we're excited to see what more we can elicit from the community. Okay, so we have two really good questions that I think get into the meat of what Shelley was talking about with the confidence in the data. And so I want to pose these ones. I know they're going to be a little bit more in depth of responses, so I promise everyone else who's asking all these really great questions in the chat that we will get to yours as well. But from our Q&A section, how do you expect state and local agencies to use this information? How are we getting information to them? How is EDF going to empower the fellows to use this information to enact real change in their community? And then what do you expect this information to accomplish on the state and local level? So I will go ahead and respond to how are we getting information out to them and how we're going to empower our fellows. But I'm going to turn it over to Shelley and Kathy one more time to talk a little bit about, what do we expect organizations and city partners and policy leaders to do with this information going forward?
Well, I'll jump in. This is Shelley. So part of what got us into this was that we get questions at MFRI sometimes from people who want to do something good for military or veteran families, and they would say to us, "Well, we want to work on unemployment among young veterans." And this was at a time when unemployment among young veterans was actually quite comparable to non-veterans, and the most urgent employment problems were not in veterans of that age group, but a different age group. And so we see lots of situations where folks are making decisions about what they want to do or how they want to focus their activities, kind of untethered to data. And data are never perfect. There are always shortcomings, but of course, as a scientist, I try to live by data whenever I can. And so in this case, I think our Dole Foundation colleagues have been very wise in trying to start to bring some data to these issues. So when you talk about how we might envision states or communities or organizations using the data, I think the first thing that we would say is, well, it's a way for beginning to get to know issues about caregivers in your area. You might be in a state where there weren't a whole lot of caregivers who responded, or you're in a very large state and you're not sure that what the caregivers at the state level said and how that might apply to your local community, well, then you've got a tool that gives you some questions to ask, and maybe you'll know to ask them a little differently now that you've seen what's happening with other states. Measuring communities also gives you a way to compare your community to other communities of similar size or other communities in your state, not necessarily about caregiver issues specifically, but maybe other issues related to military and veteran people. So our goal is to really provoke thought and asking questions and discussions about how people and organizations should be focusing their work, given what we are able to know about what's going on. I'm not sure that I've captured every part of the question, so please follow up if I missed something.
I think that was a really great overview, Shelley. I appreciate it. I think from our perspective here at EDF, we started this work with MFRI, knowing that the information in our 2014 RAND study was nationally focused, and knowing that from our 2017 RAND research blueprint that there is more work to be done. And so this is the start to that work. How we're going to be getting this information out, we have a really robust cities program as well as a fellows program, and different points of contact in each of those places. So we have about, I think, 133 cities onboarded into that program now that we can work to share the login to the Measuring Communities tool. We can share their state-specific snapshots. I think you saw one. Let's see if I can find it. Yep, this Texas snapshot right here that's on my screen. As Shelley said, provoking some of those conversations. If a community is hosting, a roundtable session or a town hall or a resource fair, and they know that they have a chance to either engage caregivers by sending them the survey in advance, or by maybe they've already sent out the survey and we have a large number of respondents in a particular area, and we know that financial resources are a big need for caregivers who responded to the survey. Maybe that's one of the things that you focus on for the resource fair, or that's one of the questions that you ask during the town hall or the roundtable. So it's coming into this not saying that we know for certain that a caregiver in Alameda County has exactly this need, but it's suggesting that here's where we can start, and here's where we can start to provide more support. We also had a question about with an organization who has many chapters, it might be difficult to get the word out to them all about this great tool. Do we have a webinar or a short video that we can send to them? You can send this webinar to anyone who requests it. We can also consider filming something that is even shorter or more scripted to provide some more concise information as well. But we want to be your partners in getting the word out on this. So tell us what you need from us, and we will get it done.
Laurel, I just wanted to share that we do have the Hidden Hero Cities mapped in the Community tab under the Community topic. So the Hidden Hero Cities are already mapped on the site.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. Hopefully that answered the question about the impact of this tool. Again, and I think we've reiterated a lot because it's important to note that it is a start, and we do need more caregivers to feed into it. And that's where, we're coming to you to request your help with all of that as well. We had another great question. with the Mission Act mandating that the VA serve all generations of veterans, I think a tool like this will be even more important in helping VA and communities understand the needs and gaps in care for all generations of veterans and caregivers. I think it'd be interesting for funders to work with you and this data to identify gaps and needs in support services for caregivers, and then work with interventionalists to develop interventions to meet those needs and gaps. Are any convenings around using the data and brainstorming areas or ideas for community-based care models being planned? So I think the question is, are we planning to meet up about this at all? And to start to plan, how to use this data going forward. That's a really great question. I think we can certainly plan for that. One thing I will tell you is that the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is hosting their 4th annual national convening on October 21st of this year. And we will definitely be showcasing this tool there. And I think that's a great place to start a conversation about how to integrate some of these initial data responses into the work that the folks who are in attendance are doing. And I guess Kathy or Shelley, anything to add on to that?
This is Shelley. I'll just say you've captured exactly the kind of thing that we had in mind when we started measuring communities. Our goal really was to contribute to a national conversation about military and veteran families and a variety of issues that they might be confronting. So I completely agree with your interest in having the VA and funders working with us and others. That sounds like a great idea. So we're always interested in collaborative opportunities. If something comes up where you in your state or your community or you're working with a funder or thinking about a project that you want to do and you think that we might be a good partner in using this as a platform to elevate some of your work, we're always interested in those ideas and happy to contribute to efforts like that. We've been very fortunate to have philanthropic funding to help us get to this stage, but I'm sure all of us on the phone are always aware of the need to always be on the hunt. So please don't hesitate to let us know if there are things that we can do to be helpful to you or elevate your efforts.
Fantastic. Let's see other questions. One note from our partners at Operation Gratitude. One thing that we did do when we created this survey was we did attach an incentive to it for those who are taking the survey. They will receive a care package from Operation Gratitude. So as you're thinking about sharing the survey with the caregivers in your network or, just your networks in general, whether or not you know if there are caregivers there or not, they will be, we don't want to, one thing we're always conscious of at the Dole Foundation is that we ask a lot from caregivers, and we want to make sure that, we just want to make sure that we are giving them a sense both for what their answers are being used for, but also thanking them in tangible ways for providing that to us. So thank you to Operation Gratitude for supporting that. And then let's see, other questions. Yes, we can send out the login information for measuring communities. It sounds like some people are having some trouble logging in. So we'll make sure that we send out a really comprehensive instruction list about how to get on as well. Another question for Shelley and Kathy. Just talking about some of the data that we already captured already, what were some of the most, surprising trends that you saw, or some of the interesting answers that you saw come through? I'd love to talk a little bit about, what exactly our caregivers said, in response to this survey, and what were some of the things that may have surprised you or caused you to think a little bit?
So this is Shelley, and others are even more expert than I about the other parts of it. So I think that what you're saying is a really great urging for Dole Foundation to release even more information about what caregivers said, and there may be things like that we can include in measuring communities, although measuring communities tends to be more about numbers than words. So things that people said that they actually wrote out, there may be other places where it would be good to report those data, although we could certainly report some in our report or on the website. Personally, I think that the diversity in the population of care recipients was striking to me, but also the very high percentage of post 9/11 folks. So caregiving is not just something about World War II veterans who are now elderly. I think that was something that was striking to me. I can't speak for Kathy and Laurel or Molly, so I'll turn it over to them to share their thoughts.
Okay. As we were looking at the information, a lot of it was just what we had anticipated. We knew that employment was a challenge, and that's showing in the data. One of the things that kind of took me back, and it's reflected in this snapshot, is really some of the differences between the pre-9/11 and the post-9/11 caregivers. Also, too, that we do have, quite a few much older caregivers that are caring for very young veterans. And so, like I said before, I think that does have implications in terms of communities and how you support an aging caregiver who is responsible for a very young veteran, and what happens to that veteran as that older caregiver is no longer able to care for that younger veteran who may have still 30, 40 years of caregiving on their lifespan, but the caregiver does not. Another thing that actually was surprising to me in terms of things that we found is that although a large majority did not have to relocate to be close to medical resources, the ones that did, they've actually had to move great distances. So when you take a look at the pie chart, and in Texas, you can see, 55 out of 170 had to relocate for medical reasons. You see that this teal, that's over 200 miles. So you can see that over 50% of those who had to move are moving over 200 miles. So when you think about community support systems, they're not moving, 20 miles. And so if I really need my neighbor or whatever, they can help out. We're talking great distances. And so any support systems that caregiver may have had in their own community, they are not only caring for potentially children in their home, the veteran themselves, but also then they have to navigate an entire new support system in an area that may be completely unfamiliar to them. And so I think this is where communities can really kind of work on that. If we've got folks that are traveling great distances or moving great distances to be closer to the medical resources that they need, how can we bridge that gap in terms of helping them kind of reconstruct this community support system? So I think that was one of the very interesting things that we found, and we thought it was so eye-opening that we did include it on the snapshot. We could have included lots of other kinds of things, but the fact that this seemed to be kind of sticking out, at least from my perspective, I think is an important thing for communities to understand.
Yeah, and I would just say, to go off of Kathy's first point, the relocation thing certainly was something eye-opening for us as well, especially going directly into these communities to let them know that, the caregivers that they might be working with might not be familiar with them, and they need to work on that. But back to sort of the aging caregiver and the young veteran, I think that speaks really well to the point previously about the Mission Act expansion, about something that we at the foundation try to, emphasize every time we talk about caregiving. It's not just a spouse caring for another spouse. And that's a really important thing for us to make sure that, we're thinking about if these are parents who are caring for a young veteran, or if it's a sibling caring for another sibling, and if there are age-related concerns or anything like that, that we're thinking through the implications of their finances and their access to their own health care, and what kinds of tax policies do we have in place that support maybe the spouses but not the caregivers overall, and how can those be expanded? So those are some of the implications for us that this tool is starting to validate, and also highlight as maybe more of an urgent need as well. One other question that came in that was somewhat similar to what we just talked about, but I'll ask it just in case, Kathy, you have a good answer for it. Do we know the largest need that we identified from the data? Was there anything specific or unique across all caregivers who responded?
Yes, and I'd have to bring up my summary table, but we know that financial resources is one of the major things. Respite care for both age groups, and then I'm trying to think of the third one, but I know it was the all caregivers. Again, it's the financial resources, the respite care, and behavioral health care for not only themselves, but potentially the children that are in the home. And so that's not terribly different from what the RAND studies have shown in terms of identifying the needs. But again, kind of this drilling down into, apart from the national level, what's happening more at the state and more local level. So this is where those survey responses, getting more of them, helps us understand better those unique geographical needs.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions from anyone on the phone? Thank you, this has been really engaging. Yes, we do. It would be really helpful to have some local data points to share with our representatives, as well as our individual efforts to advocate on behalf of caregivers. Yes, absolutely. So this is from one of our Dole Caregiver Fellows. We will definitely have a briefing for all of you on the phone. And also we have a whole community of Hidden Heroes Caregiver community members. If any of you are on the phone as well, we'd love to create some messaging points that you can draw from when talking about this tool, when you're advocating for yourselves as well. Rest assured that we are starting to think about those. We're thinking about it from a city perspective, from a caregiver perspective, from a policymaker perspective. And so any ideas that you have in those respects, how we can support the different kind of decision makers who will need this data to create things for caregivers, please feel free to send that to us, and we can work with the MFRI team to make it happen.
I'm just going to add, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I will add one other thing, just so that everyone knows. There actually is another snapshot on the Measuring Community site. There's a snapshot for every county in the country that summarizes not caregiving specific information, but military and veteran specific information for that county. So if you're going out to give talks and you want to just kind of give people an overview of the military connected population in your county and some of their issues, in addition to what the caregiver snapshot includes, that's already there for you, both for every state and for every county, and you're free to use that as you wish.
Right. And Shelley, I was going to say the same thing. And you can print these. You can print these out, because someone, I think, asked, can we get one of these, or can I get the Texas one? You can go and print it out. You can save it as a PDF. You can put it in a slide presentation. So these are printable for you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we are just about 5 minutes before our time today. Thank you again so much, Kathy and Shelley, for this fantastic presentation. As a reminder, if you have any additional questions for us or for them, you can email Molly, who sent you all of the information for the call today. Just a couple of things before we wrap up. As a reminder, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the foundation will be hosting their 4th annual convening on caregiver support. We'll be co-hosting that with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it will be here in DC on October 21st. If you are interested in that at all, we will be focusing on community initiatives like the Measuring Communities tool, and would love to have you all there. So please feel free to email us if you want more information on that. And just a closing thought, we focused on this as one of our Impact Forum calls because data and research are so important to the foundation. It really is what drives our programmatic work and our ability to understand caregivers better at all levels. And so we're grateful to work with partners like MFRI on things like this. We are also, to the great question earlier about children, we are also looking ahead to the next generation of caregivers, and have been working with our partners at the National Military Family Association and UT Health at Houston, as well as Wounded Warrior Project and the Independence Fund, to start to better understand the impact that caregiving can have on military and veteran children. That is also something that we are going to be discussing at our October convening. And we look forward to sharing some of the results of our preliminary study that we're doing on children with you there. So if you have any questions about the research that we're doing and how it translates into our programmatic work, please let us know. Our goal is to always provide the lens of the caregiver to any and all questions that you might have or issues that come up, and we can only do it with your help. So thank you all for joining us. Again, Molly at ElizabethDoleFoundation.org if you have any questions, and we will talk to you all soon.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate being able to partner with you and with all of the folks on the phone. Do let us know how you're using information, what information you want. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.